Hello, welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Verrelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. We've got an exciting interview coming up with a very special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed over $4 million and counting to pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated over $1,500,000 of aid to more than 1,500 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our events, whether that means joining a run team, participating in a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit projectpurple.org/events to learn more. Without further ado, let's meet our special guest. Coming all the way, I say all the way, yeah, it's fairly far from a very sunny and warm place as we record
Yes.
this here in our Connecticut studio. I just had to pause because I had to turn off my space heater because we haven't had heat in our office this morning. The studio was 60 degrees. But pancreatic cancer survivor, we call our survivors superhumans, Rhonda. So I'm going to use that
Mm.
term. But Rhonda Vavrek from Venice, Florida, currently in Venice, but originally from
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, the Cheeseheads.
Yes. Yes. Go Packers.
I love it. I love it. Well, Rhonda, thanks for joining us here on the Project Purple podcast. What's the temperature like today in Venice?
Well,
Make us
today
all
it's a little
jealous.
cooler compared to what we normally have. I think it's about 74 here today, but the sun is shining, so that's always a good thing. I think last week we were in the mid 80s, so it's definitely a little bit warmer than it is where I usually hail from, which is Waukesha, Wisconsin. So
And
it's
we won't see above 32. I just looked at the long term here in Connecticut for the next like 7 days, Rhonda. So I will take Venice any day of the
yes,
week, especially in the second week of December. And for most people,
absolutely.
unless I guess people are listening in from like the deep south, it's been
Right.
and it's gonna get pretty cold. I think the whole northern hemisphere is gonna be in like this Arctic chill. So
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So no, it's a nice reprieve. I'm flying back to Wisconsin next week so that we can spend Christmas. We have two grown children that are both got married last year within 4 months of each other. So that was a whirlwind, and so we're going to be back in the frozen tundra next week to be with them for Christmas, and that'll be great. So
awesome,
yeah,
awesome. Well, thanks for again joining us here on the podcast. As we said,
sure.
we were talking, we're catching up a little bit. I've got some roots down in Venice, so we were playing connect the dots down there. Beautiful area, great part of the
It
country,
is.
especially this time of year, as we said with the weather.
Absolutely. Yes,
Um,
yes.
but this is your opportunity really to kind of share your backstory about,
Sure.
your journey with pancreatic cancer. And as I said, we hope your friends and family will listen to this, so they'll probably know a
Absolutely.
little bit of this stuff.
Oh, sure.
But we have a pretty vast audience. So with that, feel free to take us wherever you want to take us, and the microphone
Absolutely.
is yours.
Sure. Well, to preface it, I have never been ill. I had only been in a hospital to have both my children, never had any type of surgery or anything like that. And it was in the summer, it was in June of 2012. And I just developed a really bad back pain in upper back between the two quadrants of my shoulders. Long story short, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, well, I do a lot. It's probably something, whatever. We didn't really think too much of it. At the time, I was on my children's high school. My daughter was the only one still in high school on their booster board. And so, doing things with that, didn't again think anything of it. And then 2 days later, I woke up and I was jaundice. And I was like, well, that can't be good. So went to see my GP, and he thought, well, it's probably your gallbladder, which kind of made sense. I have a long family history of everyone getting their gallbladder out. So I thought, sure. And so I went in for an ultrasound, and then they admitted me right away. And within 2 days, well, the next night they did a brush biopsy because on my ultrasound they said they had found something, but they were like, we don't believe this is anything. We think, it's probably benign because I met no criteria. I have never smoked. I've never drank. I always had a good weight. I was always very healthy. So they're like, this is probably just an anomaly, something we'll just go in, take out, remove. So they did a brush biopsy and they found out that it was pancreatic cancer. And but at the time, they felt like it was a low grade. It was they were I think they put me at like 2 or 2A. I don't remember. And they said, you know what, we'll give you a little bit of pre chemo because at that time the protocol was Gemzar, which
Hmm.
as chemos go, it's a pretty easy chemo. You don't really have a lot of side effects from it. And because it seemed to be a low grade, I qualified for the Whipple procedure, the Whipple surgery. So the plan was 2 months of Gemzar, and then in September, the late August, early September, I would have the Whipple, which I did. And I was 11 days in the hospital with that. I think my Whipple surgery was about 7 hours. They were there. And because of that, as most people know, they're going to pull some lymph nodes. And when they did, they realized it had metastasized. So I went to being stage 4 and being told that I had about 6 months to live. And so I
So
said,
this was post though. So like prior to, let me just pause here for a second and jump in.
"Mhm,
So prior to all of this, they're telling you, hey, stage two, let's do
right.
chemo, which was the regimen. You do chemo
Yep.
first, and then you go in for Whipple. But diagnostically, did you do an MRI or CT? Did they see anything else
Uh,
light up?
no. So what had happened was, is I had, they did an ultrasound and then the brush biopsy. But I had
Yep.
no like CT scans or anything until I actually saw the oncologist. And then they did
Yep.
like a base thing of everything.
Yep.
So they did a CBC and the whole blood thing. And then I do believe I had a CT scan and but they couldn't really see anything. And then, like I said, when they pulled the lymph nodes, then I went in and they had found that it had metastasized to my liver, both my lungs at that point.
Wow.
So they were like, hey, we got to change this up a little bit. And I
And
have
this
to,
was post. So this was post
yes, all
surgery.
of this
So,
was after.
but
So
now,
I,
did the surgeon tell you? I just want to understand this because I think
sure,
there is a difference here a little bit, and just make sure that the audience understands this.
absolutely.
So they realized stage four from the lymph node
Yes.
biopsies, but did they say they saw like mets on the liver and lungs? Like it wasn't a
No,
visual. So they just realized from
no.
the lymph node that there was progression of the disease,
Right.
but they still do the Whipple, but they don't know. Well,
Right.
sometimes they can do
Right.
the testing like right away, but usually it's like 24 hours when they get
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
precise
And
results. Because
so,
sometimes those quick ones can be like false positives, so that I know they like to
absolutely.
wait.
Because I remember I was in the hospital when my surgeon, and it was interesting because when I first went in thinking that it was my gallbladder, I remember telling my doctor, I said, well, get Dr. Davies, Chris Davies. He used to live behind us. We knew them and stuff. That was the only surgeon I knew. So we had a relationship with him. And I remember he came into the hospital and just said, hey, this is what we have found. And I would say even then, I I I did not have like a sense of doom. And I think part of it is that in when I look back, I think a little bit of this was good for me. I was very naive as far as how deadly pancreatic cancer was because it just doesn't get a lot of press, especially back in 2012. I didn't really know a lot about my pancreas, to be perfectly honest with you. And so even when he said, oh, well, it's here, here, and here, I mean, I knew that couldn't be good, but in my mind, I still thought, well, we can take care of this. And then I remember I was home. I had been released from the hospital. I think it was the next day. I got a call from my oncologist, and that's when he said, "Now you are stage 4." And
Mm.
I remember saying, well, what exactly does that mean? And he said, "Well, you have about 6 months." And but with that, we got in, and I remember talking to my oncologist, who's just a wonderful, all my doctors are just fantastic. And Dr. Hake, and I just told him, I said, if you are honest with me and if you are on my team, if you tell me that you have a lot of levers you can pull, I will do anything you want me to do. And he said, absolutely. He said, this does not mean we give up. This stage 4 does not mean we give up. So from that, I was put on fluorouracil or 5-FU,
Hmm.
which is the complete opposite of Gemzar. It's a horrible, horrible chemo. And for those that know, no, you go. It's a very long chemo that day. I think you're there for like 7 hours from the time you get there to the time you leave. And then they put a pump on you and you go home with that pump. And that pump for, 48 hours continues to give you, chemo. So I did that. And I remember, I think it was my second uh, chemo of that. And they drew my CA19 number, which is the number that uh, kind of gauges where you are. 32 and below is considered normal. And I think at that point I was like 1980. So I was almost at 2000. So I'm thinking to myself, well, that can't be good,
Yeah.
And but then we saw progress. We actually saw the numbers going down, and so that gave us a lot of hope that this fluorouracil, even though I felt like it was killing me every time I had it done, was working. And it's interesting because sometimes my husband and I, will talk about things that have happened, and we kind of look at like how things lined up. And my oncologist had just gone to like a seminar or some type of thing in Europe, and they were talking about how fluorouracil now should be the standard. And that had
Hmm.
just been 2 months prior to me being uh, diagnosed. And we always say, it's like, well, no time is a good time to be diagnosed with cancer. But wow, that was a pretty good time because, we had this new thing that they had seen really great success with. So yeah, so I had this really bad chemo, and for those that have had it, know that it's really hard, and you lose a lot of weight, and you get sick, and it's all of that. And but what kept us going was that my numbers were improving, and everything was looking really great. And during that time, I ended up having my liver ablated because I had 6 lesions in my liver. So I had a doctor that did that, and that was very successful. And then I had a little kind of a hiccup, and everything was looking really, really well, looking great. And I had a lesion in my left lung. And my oncologist said, I think we can take care of that with some radiation. And uh, and with some, so what they normally do is they're going to put like a piece of metal in you to kind of so that it can find it. And it's a very simple process. You go into like a bore for a CT scan, and then they place it.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, something happened, and the radiologist who was doing it nicked one of my arteries. And so I started to bleed out. So, because of that, and we all know how cancer travels, it travels through blood. And so I had this like just a highway of moving cancer throughout. So, what started is what could have been taken care of at a really easy thing, which was radiation. Not that radiation is super easy, but it's, in
Yeah.
my case, this would have been something pretty good. Ended up having me subsequently, over a couple of other surgeries, having the lower left lobe of my lung removed. Um, in that. And I had some emergency surgery. Again, I had another great thoracic surgeon who did that, was just an awesome person. And yeah, so I ended up with that. And then everything again looked good. I had some more chemo. I think all in all, I ended up with 33 sessions of chemo. And that looked really great. And then one day I just was feeling on the left side of my ribs, and I was like, I just don't think that's right. And I remember we made an appointment, and I had a tumor that had formed on the outside of my ribs, which was very good because it was a stupid tumor. It didn't know enough to come in. So I had to have surgery that they actually removed part of two ribs and put some type of like Kevlar uh, fabric there. So they were able to remove that. And again, I had some cleanup chemo for that. And and I hate to use the word journey, but my situation kind of took a lot of twists and turns. I didn't have like, I got diagnosed, I took the chemo, and then this is what happened, which I think sometimes people that aren't in the know, like I was before I got diagnosed, they heard, oh, you got diagnosed in 2012, and here we are in 2025, and you're fine, and everything went really well and easily. And obviously, it's never that simple. It's not simple for anyone, but it's never a straight line because you just don't know where this beast is going to end up in your body. And so all in all, I had a lot of chemo. I had, including getting my port put in, I think I had 5 surgeries. I have had over 53 CT scans. Um, I have had, some 2 full sets of radiation and some CyberKnife, but I am here, and I am here for many reasons, I think. I'm here because I had the support of my family, my husband, who we will be celebrating our 45th wedding anniversary in January. And I tell everyone I wouldn't be here because if it wasn't for him, he's a very stubborn man, and he pushed me and had me do things that I probably didn't want to do, but I did them. I'm here because I had, and still to this day, have wonderful doctors and surgeons and nurses. And I've always said, especially oncology nurses, they don't become that because there's no more spots on the other sign up sheets. They become oncology nurses for a purpose. And I never had one nurse that did not treat me with the most wonderful care and respect. I'm here because of my faith. I'm here because I think that I also have a little bit of luck. And and I think that's kind of a hard thing to understand because during the course of me being diagnosed, I had 2 good friends whose husbands got diagnosed with different types of cancers, both cancers they should have survived and they didn't. And that is hard sometimes, that I got the cancer that I wasn't supposed to survive and I did. And they got cancer that most likely they should have survived and they didn't. And I do believe, unfortunately, there is a little bit of luck. I responded very well to platinum-based chemo, which is FOLFIRINOX. I know some
Mhm.
people don't, and I did. And I think that is the biggest reason, because I did respond so well to it. Um, I also think it's important because whenever I would go for a scan, and then the tech would know what I'm
Yeah.
getting scanned for, and they always want to know, well, how did you know, what was your symptoms, because this is a very, cancer is scary on its own, but then when you hear pancreatic cancer, people are like, oh, and I've always said, you really need to know your body, even the slightest change. And I think it's also important, if you can, I know this isn't the reality for a lot of people. But if you have a good relationship with, say, your general practitioner or whatever, when I went to see my GP and told him about this pain and that, he knew something wasn't right. And so he fast tracked me to like, we've got to get this checked out. So I think that's super important to know. I found my tumor on my ribs because I know my body. I make sure that I'm in tune with that. And I think that's a super important part of taking care of ourselves just in general, whether it be for cancer or not. And I also think another thing that's super important, and I'm sure some of the other people that you've spoken to might have said this too. When people find out that, you've got diagnosed and they say, oh, well, you took such good care of yourself. You didn't smoke, you didn't drink, you ate well, and you still got it. I smoke a pack a day or I drink or whatever. I get that. However, if you take care of yourself, it doesn't mean that you won't get the cancer, but it helps you fight the cancer because fighting cancer is not for wimps and it will take everything out of you. And if you're already starting at a deficit, it
Mhm.
just makes that so much harder to, come to the other side of it. So, but oh, and humor. You got to have a little humor because this can get really ugly and serious and awful and horrible really quickly. And you have to keep that. Like when I was told I had to get a port, I was very afraid because I'd never had surgery and that was my first surgery. And I was talking to a girlfriend of mine and she said, no, Rhonda, it's good. This is all good because that is what is going to bring the medicine into your body to take care of this cancer. So I thought about that and I said, she's right. I have to embrace this. So I named my port George Clooney because I said, well, George Clooney plays all these different things on television. He can do it all. And plus, I can tell people I sleep with George Clooney every night. So, so that was always a joke that whenever I would go in, I would get some of the same nurses, some of the same techs, and they would say, "How's George today? How are we doing with George?" And you do have to try to live your life as best as you can, as normal as you can. You cannot let it take over. So that's that's what I discovered. And I remember talking to my oncologist, and my daughter was going to start her senior year. I got diagnosed in June, and she would start her senior year of high school in September. And he said to me, he says, well, what is your goal? And I said, well, I want to see my daughter graduate from high school. And so I did. And then he said, well, what's your next goal? I said, well, I want to see my son graduate from college. And then I want to see my daughter graduate from college. And then I said, I want to see my kids get married. And like I said, both my children got married last year. And this August, my son and daughter in law had our first grandchild. And in June of 2012, I never thought I would have all of this goodness uh, be heaped on me and that I could see it. And I'll
Mhm.
never be that person that says, oh, getting cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me because I saw the sun shine a little bit better or whatever. No, I'll never say that. But I will say I am lucky in a lot of ways because I saw so many people who loved me and wanted to help me. And I got to see that. And a lot of people don't get to see that in their lives. And so I do consider myself lucky in a lot of different ways. So that's that is that story.
Pretty special. I've got a bunch of questions here,
Oh,
Rhonda.
sure.
First one here, timeline. I know you like so you talk about humor, and this isn't funny, but you were kind of very like, yeah, 53 CAT scans, CT
Yes.
scans, five surgeries, 33 sessions of chemo, like, and for Florinox, we've talked about that. I mean, that's the kitchen sink of all chemos. I mean, I think it's
Oh,
one of the most toxic cocktails
that's a hard
that
one.
anyone can have in all of oncology for any cancer. And the reason there's a lot of reasons for that, but with pancreatic cancer, the tumors are so resistant to a lot of the chemos. But
Yes.
for some reason, for some people, FOLFIRINOX does the trick, right? So yours was, that trick. What's the timeline from like start to finish in terms of treatment? So we know like this starts in June 2012. You
Hmm.
actually, it's kind of wild, and I'll ask something in a second here, but
Sure.
you get into treatment very quick, which is awesome.
Yep.
So from June 2012 to the last treatment for any of the complications, the tumor on the side of your ribs, what's the timeline like? Is that 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 6 months?
2018 was the last
2018. Okay.
evident any kind of
And that was the
occurrence
rib.
that I had.
That
Yep,
was the rib.
that was the rib surgery. So,
So
like I
really
said, they
6 years
yeah, yeah. And like my oncologist said, I'll never be able to say that I'm cancer free because that just doesn't work
Yeah.
with this. So we always look for NED, no evidence of
Yeah,
disease.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's our goal is NED. And so I can say I've had NED since 2018. And I would in the last 2 years, or yeah, 2 years, I've gone to just having to have one CT scan a year.
Versus
So
what were you doing every 6 months?
well, yeah, before that, every 6 months. And then
Yep.
I would go in because, I still have my port because that's sort of I'm nervous to get rid of it. So
Yeah.
I have to get my port flushed like every 6 weeks to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And, in that. But yeah, so 2018 is the last time I had any kind of anything, surgery, radiation, that type of thing. So,
So I'm going to ask you a question since you're talking
sure.
about the scans. So how do you deal with the scanxiety?
Okay. So that was tough. So when I first started going, um, we have something called my chart, which is,
Yeah. Yeah,
every
you can
every
read your
insurance
chart
company,
from.
whatever
Yeah.
has that, right?
Yeah.
So back
You
in
can
the
read
day,
your
they wouldn't.
results before you actually talk to the
Well, you
doctor.
couldn't before. You
Now,
couldn't. So they used to hold those,
yeah.
so you didn't see it. So, we would have the scan and then 2 days later you would see your oncologist. So for those 2 days, you don't know. You don't know if you're going to get to pass go. You don't know if you get to collect your $200, which is a tough gig. And it's horrible. You're just, you're making all kinds of deals. You are whatever you can do. And then once you get called into the room, you feel like you're just sitting there for days until they walk in and you look at their face to know whether or not do I get to go on with my life for the next 3 months or next 6 months, however long is in between. And a lot of times I couldn't. A lot of times it was like, "Ugh, it's not looking good, Rhonda. It's back," or it's, I've had he's sent me down to go get another scan or whatever just to to look at certain things. But now, and I would say it's probably been like this for probably 6 years now, everything gets released. And so you see it right away. And my husband is an engineer. Okay. So he's very like everything has a box and we put everything in the box and then we put the box on the. So ever since I got diagnosed, he has all of my numbers, all of my blood work, all of my scans. They're all grafted. They're all,
You got pie
and
charts and Excel sheets on top of
oh,
each
all
other.
of it. Yeah, we could do a presentation with, but which was always good because when I would go and we would see the results, I would be, just hyper fixating on every little thing. And he was able to show me, like, you need to take a step back and look
Yeah.
to see in the reality you're doing okay, and that. So, yeah, that scan fear and anxiety is so real. It is you know, because you just don't know because it can stop you and say, you don't get to go forward now, you know.
Yeah. But something you just said, and I mean, my brother's an engineer, so I know the type. That though engineering, people who are engineers and that engineer mind, like it's like, hey, how does the watch work? Like they want to know and I guess that's the analogy I'm trying to use here, but if you think about and something you just said is really powerful. So to have a mindset like that, to realize like, hey, from a statistical standpoint, you're in a very good spot, is what you said, what your husband was saying, because
Hmm.
you had all the data. And I don't think enough people think about that. Like, but the other piece too, so you had the data to back that up, but I'm sure this probably crossed your path at some point, maybe mentally, or maybe, in discussion with your husband or maybe the clinicians, is like, you said something before, like the doctor said, well, hey, you have 6 months, but he doesn't know that. Like, that's just the
Nope.
data that's presented in front of him. But like, the data is not 100%. And that's
Nope.
something that, I think selfish plug here for our podcast, why we do the podcast, is to share these stories because people out there that, hear that from their doctor, like, hey, you have 6 months. I would, and I've never been in that situation. Like my dad, like I didn't know enough at the time when we were given that information with my dad, but
Hmm.
we decided to pivot and go somewhere where, we weren't told that, if that makes sense. But
Oh,
if
sure.
me personally, I would clap back, and I guess I'm not a doctor and I'm not a mental health expert, but I would say for people watching and listening, if a doctor does give you that, I would maybe clap back and say like, well, how do you know that?
Hmm.
Like
Right.
what data points to that to
A
show
hundred
that
percent.
and so like I guess like my point here in bringing this all up is like it's fascinating what you said about your husband and having that mindset like an engineer, but then also looking at like, hey, you're doing really well
Hmm.
comparatively speaking, so like, hey, we're
Right.
not in that cohort, like we're the better side of it, right? But I think a lot of
100%.
people get like beat down like right away with just like a doctor saying, "Hey, well, you got 6 months." Well,
Right.
how the hell do you
Right.
know that? Like, you don't know the data.
Well,
Like, the data is not 100% that everybody's gone in
100%.
6 months.
Yes. And in defense of my doctor, when he gave me that information, I know he has to give you all of the information.
But does he
And
have
then
to
when
though?
we,
This is
well,
my
I
this.
think they
I'm not trying to
do.
beat up on your doctor,
No,
Rhonda. Like, this is like I feel like doctors like sometimes like do they really they don't know. So that should they speak? It's like if a doctor talks to you about nutrition, he knows nothing about nutrition.
right, right.
But then the
I
data though too is like weird too because like they don't know the data 100%. It's not 100.
I I think they should give it to you with a caveat, which is what my doctor did. He said, technically, looking at the books, looking at what they look at, you technically have 6 months. However, I think we can throw a lot of things at this, and I think we can have a pretty good, outcome because of my situation. And so he was very good. He told me straight up, he's like, I don't want you to doom scroll. I don't want you to go on the internet and look at horrible things. He's like, if you are going to look at things, I want you to look at, things like PanCan, things like that, that could give me some good information. But I
Yeah.
will say, what really helped me at the very beginning. So when I first got diagnosed, like I said, I was on the booster board at my kid's school. And I remember we had a meeting and I said, hey, I've been diagnosed. I can't, I've got to give up my seat and all that. And after the meeting, I had a gentleman come up to me and he said, hey, my dad got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer like 6 years ago and he's doing great. Would you like to meet him? And I said, absolutely. Because it was like, well, yeah, I want to see somebody in the flesh that has come out of the other side of this because all I had ever heard was, because it's interesting. After I got diagnosed, we went to go get two second opinions. We went to a hospital in our same town, and they were like, "Yep, everything he says is right."
Hmm.
Then we went to Chicago. I won't say the hospital, and I went there and they were so dismissive. They had already decided that I was not worth even checking out. And I had already had the Whipple. And I remember they were just so dismissive and so condescending. And she pretty much just looked at me and said, you need to go home and put all your affairs in order. And I kind of did the equivalent of really hold my beer because not today. I was like, what do I have to lose? And that's what I told my oncologist. I said, as long as I can do it, as long as I can, you know, get get to it, I'm going to do it. And we were very fortunate. My husband the company he works for, we had great insurance. I never had to pick or choose. I could have the chemo and the surgery and, all of that. I know that's not the reality for a lot of people. Um, so yeah, I never thought when I was told, oh, you have like 6 months to say, okay, well, I'm just going to go sit in a hole. But I
Yeah.
understand how that would affect a lot of people to do that because, and I've always told people the difference between you and me is I've had a scan. So I know my enemy, and that's really the only difference. And so, but I totally get that. I think that whole how long do I have kind of thing is a very dangerous thing if it's not done well or right, I guess. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, but powerful that you shared that. So I really appreciate that. Um, I know you mentioned um, family history negative, but though then you did bring something up, which I think is like it's like the cousin of the pancreas, which is the gallbladder, which
Yes.
the gallbladder is responsible for bile production and the bile duct, and that is closely related and has been, seen in data as complications with pancreatic cancer. And typically in a Whipple is, one of the organs that is removed,
Right. Mine
typically,
was taken. Yep.
you know. So genetics, I know
hmm
like 2012, you were a little bit before the curve where we are today, where I think it
Right.
was like 2018 is when it was mandated. So have you ever done a genetic panel by any chance?
We did. Yes. So I think it was with the tumor that ended up in my left lung.
Yeah.
um, my oncologist said, I think we should get some genetic testing. So we did that and we went through the whole genetic panel. And I mostly wanted to do it for my kids because I didn't want something hanging over their heads if it didn't need to be. And again, if
Correct.
there was something, I wanted them to be aware of it. And my genetic testing came back a little different, I think. So my tumor tested positive for the BRCA1 gene. My tumor did,
Ah,
but I did not. So based on
which
that,
can happen though. So this is
yes.
interesting. So you are the first to, well, I can't say definitively if you're the first that we've had on the podcast. We've had a lot of people that are, BRCA1, BRCA2,
hmm
germline, and then the tumor is identical to that. So now
Yeah.
this would all kind of full circle make sense because you mentioned platinum-based drugs, which the platinum-based drugs work really well with those BRCA
Yep.
mutations. So your
Absolutely.
tumor comes
Yes.
back positive, which is interesting because we've had discussion and people go, well, I was just tested, like my germline wasn't tested, but not the tumor, which if you look at the data, and case in point here, Rhonda, you could have someone with no, and this is why we advocate that, hey,
That's
you
correct.
have to be your biggest
That is
advocate
correct.
because the tumor can have a different sequence than you.
That's right. That is right. 100%. And when we went through that testing, at the end of the day, they said, well, your children do not have any more of a risk factor than any other person, to get the disease. And then at the time, and I apologize, I can't remember the study, but they ended up sending the tumor. I believe it's a study out of California at uh, one of the universities that are linked to a hospital out there, and so they
Uh-huh.
sent it there for more testing that way. Um, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of times throughout my whole part of my, getting chemo and surgeries and that it was not supposed to turn out well, and it did. And again, I'm not real sure what that reason is. I try to help as many people as I can as far as, giving them the information that I lived with and all of that. But no, absolutely. I tell people all the time, go get that genetic testing done.
Yeah.
I think it's huge. Um, and it's super important.
It's fascinating. There was some recent data about 6 months ago that showed like only so the NIH, which sets policy for, treatment, they put
Right.
that in place in 2018, and this was going back not up to date, like up to 2025, but I believe it was up to like 20, maybe 2022 was the data that only
Okay.
like 30% of patients with pancreatic cancer have been tested. Like
Yeah,
30%. That's pretty bad. So yeah, I mean, you're living proof on why you need to test both the
you do.
tumor and the patient. So really, really powerful then there, like that story. Wow. Um, I've got a couple questions left for you here. The next couple
Sure.
questions are loaded. I call them loaded, meaning there's no right or wrong answer. They're just
Sure.
thought-provoking, and your answer is the best answer. What, given your situation, your experience, what you went through, all the treatments, all the procedures, everything that you've gone through, where you are today, and I know you've said a lot of these things, but maybe to summarize it here in this segment, what advice would you give someone, maybe that is just sitting back to where you were in June of 2012, listening to this
Sure.
podcast? Like, what should they do? What would be that advice?
I would say if you don't feel comfortable and trust your doctor that you have right now, to find a doctor that will work with you and that will put you first, that will say what my doctor said. This isn't a death sentence. We're going to pull all of these levers for you. So I think that's number one. I also think that you should sit with a little bit of grace with yourself because you're going through some hard things and you're going to go through some really hard things. And don't get, I would say, don't get caught up in a lot of chatter. Because I remember when I first got diagnosed, I think that weekend I made my husband take me to Barnes and Noble. I said, "Oh, I have to read all the books on cancer." We went to the cancer section. I was like, "I need to buy all these books." And I did. And by the end of the week, I threw them all away because I think the number one thing is that you are a statistic of your own self. And what will work for somebody else will not work for you as far as you're going to get everything from drink a green smoothie to, you know, just, wear blue clothes or whatever. And it all sounds silly, but that's what you'll get bombarded with because I think just being a human being, we're a very cause and effect kind of society. Everybody wanted to know, well, why did you get it? Why did you get it? And even I wanted to know. I remember I said to my oncologist, I said, is it because I had a lot of ham sandwiches, like, and that, and he's like, no, but
Deli meat.
I think that's the society we live in. You always need that cause and effect, and you just have to give yourself some grace, and it's okay to do whatever you need to get to the best place that you could possibly be with this. I can't even say to be okay because you may not feel like you're okay. I remember at some point my hair got real thin and I started to look like this weird, nutty professor kind of guy. And my husband came home and I sat at the kitchen table and I had the cutters and I said, it's time, just take it. And he's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, I think this will make me feel better. And whenever he could, my husband would say, I talked with, Dr. Hake, I'm going to take you to Florida. We're going to get away from this. And I remember I had just done my hair and I hadn't gotten my wig back yet. So I didn't have any, I was like, well, I can't go like this. And he's like, hold on a minute. And he orders the most hideous wig for me from Amazon. And it was just those types of things. If you can remove yourself from it just for a little while, I think that's super important. It just is. You just have some grace with yourself. I think that's like probably the most important thing is that.
It's a home run. And you are a statistic of your own self is like, wow.
Yeah,
That is so true. And as we said before, like that's like as a patient advocate, one of the most frustrating things when we hear these stories about, like you said, the doctor. And then again, I'm not trying to go back to
I
beating up on the
know.
doctor, but like, saying, hey, you have 6 months. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows, right? Nobody
And
knows.
Nobody knows. And not even some of the smartest people
Nope,
in this space know that this person's going to fare better than that person or vice versa, and that's, I think,
never.
that's a frustration, but that's also hope, right? That's hope
That's
for
right.
every single person that's diagnosed with this disease to understand that. I don't think enough of the medical community conveys that. And I don't know if that's arrogance or if it's like maybe they feel like they may get sued or something. I don't know, but whatever. That's
Yeah,
neither here
I
nor there.
get that.
But it's
Yeah,
our job as advocates to preach that and make sure people know that. So thank you for
absolutely.
sharing that, Rhonda. Last question here, then we're going to share where our audience can connect with you for maybe there's someone out there that's going through a very similar thing that you went through and maybe
Sure.
find strength in talking to you further. But before we get there, this is the loaded question of loaded questions. Given
Bring
your
it.
experience, how do you define pancreatic cancer? What's your definition? No right or wrong.
Okay, that's a really good question.
That's why we save it for last.
Okay, I would say pancreatic cancer is it's like a uh, it's like a monster that has come into your home. But during the duration of this monster being in your home, it shows you a lot of different things, and it affects the people that are closest to you in different ways, but not always in the worst way. So, obviously, the number one thing that this monster does is it threatens to kill you. And it does a really good job at, at almost succeeding. And in a lot of times, it does succeed. So, that monster will do that. But that monster will also make you be stronger than you ever thought. And that strength that that monster gives you will then flow to the people that you love. My daughter will tell me, Mom, I can do hard things because I saw you do hard things. My son will tell me, I appreciate things more because I know we almost lost you. And so, as much as I hate this beast, I hate this monster, it came and I couldn't do anything about it. So I had to open up the door, but it does kind of it leaves little different kind of suggestions out there. And yeah, on one hand, it's trying to kill you, but then on the other hand, it's rallying the troops around you. And I had so many wonderful people that said, you know what, not today, not today. She's not going anywhere today. And so, yeah, I guess that's how I would categorize pancreatic cancer. It sucks. It's a beast. It's horrible. And I wish it wasn't here. But me getting it, I think it allowed me to see that I could do things I never thought I could do. When people hear a little bit of what I tell them, they say, oh, I could never do that. Or, oh, I can't believe. I say to them, yes, you can. You can do this. Because what is your alternative? That is our instinct as a human being is to live. We fight to
Mhm.
live. And I think of we watched years ago very quickly when I first got diagnosed. My husband and I watched. I think it was on PBS. It was the it was a book, The Maladies of All. Uh, oh, I can't even think of it. I apologize, but it was about cancer, and they talked about how the treatments for cancer, how horrible they were at the very beginning. Like when a woman got breast cancer, they just took half of her body practically, and all of that. And and that's the thing. It's just like even when it's the most horrible possible outcome that you can get, you still fight to get on the other side of it. And so, yeah, that's that's how I would categorize pancreatic cancer. So, yeah,
Powerful. I think
thank you.
there's a book about that. That there was a professor at Yale that talking about like how awful treatments were in the beginning and
Yes.
how we've evolved. I think it's called The Death of Cancer, and the gentleman's name
Okay.
is Vincent. I'm drawing a blank here. That's why looking at the bookshelf here in our podcast studio with our books, but yeah, that's just so powerful, Rhonda. I think you Um, we've had many responses and people like there's never like the same answer to that question. And we asked that question for a reason, but I mean, it's just powerful to hear like, um, the things that you and your family gain from going through that is pretty
Right.
special. So I want to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share your journey. It's been an honor. As I said before, for those maybe watching or listening that want to connect with you, where's the best place?
Probably my email. And so that is R and then V as in Victor, AV again, 62 at Gmail.
Awesome.
Yep. Yeah.
Rhonda, thank you so much for
Well,
allowing
it
us
was
here
my
at Project
pleasure.
Purple the opportunity to share your story.
Well, thank you again. And like I said before, thank you for all that you do because this makes a world of difference to people, more than you could probably ever know. And thank you so much for reaching out to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you like today's episode, make sure to like the episode. Make sure to follow us on YouTube and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. Till next time, please be safe and thanks for watching and listening.